February 1258. Baghdad is already finished. The fires just haven't reached every street yet. Inside the treasury, Caliph al-Musta'sim is being marched past gold he never used. Gold stacked higher than the men, who died defending walls he never reinforced. The guard beside him are not his. They watch his face, waiting for the moment understanding finally arrives. This walk is not ceremonial. It is terminal. Outside, the city burns. Inside, the fountains are dry. In Baghdad, that only happens when power is already dead. Al-Musta'sim is the successor of prophets, ruler of the wealthiest city on earth, the center of a civilization that believed itself permanent. Before the next call to prayer, his body will be gone, not executed, not judged, not remembered as a man. What happens next to him and to his family is not about mercy. It is about witnesses. Because the Mongols did not come to take Baghdad. They came to make sure no ruler ever forgets what happens when power mistakes gold for strength. And when the gates fall, the world will learn too late that nothing sacred survives force. 4 or 5 centuries, Baghdad had been the axis of the world, not merely of an empire, but of thought itself. This was the city where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics fused with Islamic law, where knowledge accumulated into libraries cataloging everything from medicine to mechanics. The House of Wisdom alone held texts that would take multiple lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi shaped algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical works Europe would not translate for 400 years. Scholars crossed deserts from Spain to Samarkand just to study inside Baghdad's walls. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Water flowed through underground canals engineered generations earlier. Markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Hospitals treated patients regardless of faith or wealth. This was not a civilization in decay. This was a civilization operating at full capacity. And ruling over it stood the caliph, not merely a king, not merely a political authority. He was a successor to Muhammad, spiritual leader to millions, a legitimacy stretching back 37 generations. Al-Musta'sim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a state that had been quietly hollowing out for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still commanded religious authority, but its armies were mostly mercenaries. Its governors were semi-independent strongmen. Its treasury overflowed, yet little of it was spent on defense. Because Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had endured civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and collapse around it while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept trading. So when reports arrived from the east, Baghdad noticed and waited. Horsemen had erased the Khwarezmian Empire. Horsemen had emptied Persian cities. Horsemen who did not stop for rivers, mountains, or negotiated borders. Baghdad took note, and then it did nothing, because the Mongols were not simply an army. They were a mechanism, a system refined over 50 years of uninterrupted warfare across frozen steppe, open desert, and high mountain. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind more than conquered land. He left doctrine, a method that turned conquest into a repeatable process, something that could be taught, delegated, and executed without improvisation. One of his grandson, Hulagu Khan, was assigned to carry that system west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai gave him a directive that left no room for interpretation. Secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not defeat, submission. Because the Mongol Empire was not built on occupation. It was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early were left intact. Their rulers remained in place. Their people lived. They paid tribute. They acknowledged Mongol supremacy and continued their lives under new authority. Cities that refused did not survive. Every target received the same sequence. First came the messengers. Written terms, delivered calmly. Submit immediately. Send tribute. Provide hostages, usually the sons of rulers. Accept Mongol authority. Compliance meant survival. Walls would stand. Markets would remain open. The population would live. Refusal triggered nothing at first. No threats, no raised voices, no ultimatum beyond the one already given. Only silence. Weeks passed, sometimes months. Life inside the city continued. Defenders began to believe the Mongols had moved on, that distance or reputation had spared them. Then the horizon filled. Horsemen appeared in numbers too large to count. Not scattered, not chaotic. Formations move with discipline. Wagons followed, heavy and deliberate. Siege engines arrived in pieces. The army did not attack. It encircled every gate, every road, every river crossing, every possible escape sealed. Then construction began. In full view of the defenders, siege engines were assembled, trebuchets capable of throwing stones weighing hundreds of pounds. Engineers from China and Persia worked alongside Mongol soldiers. The city watched as machines were built specifically to dismantle its walls. Only then did a second embassy arrive. The terms were repeated word for word. No additions, no softening. This was the final chance. Most cities surrendered at this stage. If refusal continued, the siege began not as chaos, but as procedure. Walls were taken in calculated sections. Infantry advanced in organized units. Cavalry secured the perimeter. There was no rush, no waste of lives. Efficiency mattered more than speed. Once inside, the population was sorted. Artisans were identified and spared. Scholars were identified and spared. Engineers were identified and spared. Anyone with skills useful to the empire was removed from the city and redistributed across Mongol territories. Everyone else was gathered outside the walls. What followed was recorded by multiple sources. It was not random violence. It was systematic elimination. Cities were burned not out of rage, but as proof, because the Mongols did not conquer for land. They conquered for obedience. And every destroyed city became instruction for the next. By 1257, Hulagu had applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused and was erased. Merv refused and was emptied. Herat refused and was reduced to ruins. Refusal carried consequences that echoed for generations. And now Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Mongol envoys arrived. 3 riders, 1 letter. You already know what happened to the cities of Persia. You know the price of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter reached the caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the arguments had already split the room. Caliph al-Mustasim summoned his advisors, and consensus collapsed almost immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, spoke first. He did not appeal to fear. He appealed to evidence. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It had fortified cities, mountain strongholds, deep treasuries. It no longer existed. Nishapur's walls had been 30 feet thick. Merv had been called the city the world depends on. Both had been erased. These are not raiders, Ibn al-Alqami warned. This is a military system refined over 50 years of continuous war. We cannot defeat them. We can only survive them. His recommendation was direct. Immediate submission, full tribute, open the gates before a siege could even begin. The head of Baghdad's army rejected the proposal outright. The Mongols, he argued, were steppe cavalry. Masters of open terrain, yes, but Baghdad was not open terrain. Its walls had never been breached. No foreign army had taken the city by force. The Mongols were far from their supply base. They had never laid siege to a fully prepared metropolis like this one. They cannot sustain a long siege here, he insisted. They will exhaust themselves. Then a third voice entered the debate, the theologians. Baghdad was not merely a city. It was the seat of the caliphate, the symbolic center of Islamic civilization. The The successor of the prophet ruled here. God would not permit pagans to destroy the lineage of Muhammad. Divine protection was not an opinion to them. It was certainty. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a crisis like this. Contemporary accounts describe him as devoted to scholarship, fond of luxury, deeply uncomfortable with military matters, a man who trusted the authority of his position more than the mechanics of power. He read Hulagu's letter again. Then he looked at his advisers. "We are the caliphate," he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." The envoys were dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations ordered. Ibn al-Alqami tried once more. "If we refuse," he said quietly, "they will come." "Then let them come," the caliph replied. On September 24th, 1257, the Mongol envoys rode out of Baghdad. They carried no reply, only confirmation of refusal. What followed mattered more than the refusal itself. The caliph did not mobilize the army. He did not reinforce the walls. He did not open the treasury to fund defenses. Court life continued as usual, banquets and ceremonies proceeding as if the threat might dissolve through neglect. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began to move. On November 11th, Mongol advance forces appeared roughly 30 miles from Baghdad. Scouts reported back. Cavalry units, perhaps 5,000 horsemen. No siege engines visible. Baghdad's military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongol force was small and isolated, it could be destroyed in open terrain. A decisive victory would prove the city's strength and break the illusion of Mongol invincibility. Orders were given. The gates opened. Baghdad's army marched out to meet the horsemen. Confident, untested, unaware that they were not facing an army at all, but the opening movement of a mechanism already in motion. A decisive victory, the commander argued, would restore confidence and halt any further advance. Immediate action was advised. The caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men in total, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. The largest force the caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried provisions for 3 days. The plan was simple and familiar. Intercept the Mongol advance detachment, engage in open battle, destroy it before reinforcements could arrive, then return to Baghdad in triumph. On November 15th, 1257, the armies met roughly 25 miles northeast of the city. Baghdad's commander deployed his troops according to tradition. Cavalry on the wings, infantry anchored at the center. Across the plain, the Mongol force appeared smaller than expected. Perhaps 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. What followed survives only through the testimony of those who escaped. The Mongol line withdrew, but not in panic. Units pulled back in sequence, maintaining spacing and cohesion. Baghdad's cavalry pursued. 1 mile, then 2, still organized, still confident. Then the ground itself seemed to move. From gullies to the north and south, hidden Mongol formations surged forward at once. Baghdad's cavalry suddenly found itself encircled, not by 4,000 horsemen, but by closer to 15,000. Mongol cavalry archers rode at full gallop, firing composite bows that punched through armor at 200 yards. Formation dissolved. Command vanished. Momentum turned to panic. From the center, Baghdad's infantry watched their cavalry wings disappear into the Mongol mass. Realization spread faster than orders. They began retreating toward the city. The Mongols did not chase them. They closed the circle around the remaining cavalry and eliminated them deliberately, methodically. By nightfall, it was over. Of the 20,000 men who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The caliph's personal guard was gone. The mercenary cavalry destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed, not routed, not scattered, but erased. When the survivors reached the court, denial became impossible. This had not been a skirmish. It had been a trap, A small force had drawn Baghdad's army into open ground and annihilated it with precision. By December, the main Mongol host appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were all that remained. On January 11th, 1258, the Mongol army completed its encirclement of the city. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. They did not merely surround Baghdad. They constructed a system around it. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were established. Supply lines stretched back into Persia. Escape became impossible. Siege engines were assembled openly, in full view of the walls. Chinese engineers worked beside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets took shape with geometric precision. Day after day, Baghdad's defenders watched the machines being built. They could see exactly what was coming. They could calculate what it would do. On January 17th, Hulagu sent another embassy. The message had changed. The time for full submission had passed. But the caliph might still preserve his life. Open the gates. Present yourself. Order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days, and the population would be spared. The caliph convened what remained of his advisers. The pragmatist vizier spoke again. There is no field army, he said. No allies are coming. There is nothing left between what stands outside the walls and what remains inside them. The religious scholars continued to invoke divine protection. The caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. On January 29th, at dawn, the trebuchets opened fire. Not randomly, not for intimidation, systematically. Mongol engineers had spent 2 weeks measuring wall thickness, identifying structural weaknesses, calculating angles of impact. The stones struck the same sections again and again. Each impact created microfractures in masonry that had stood for 5 centuries. The bombardment continued for 8 hours. Then it stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further under their own weight. On February 1st, the bombardment resumed, now focused entirely on the compromised areas. By afternoon, cracks were visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began to fail. On February 5th, the eastern wall collapsed. A 90-foot section disintegrated completely. Mongol infantry advanced toward the breach. They did not charge. They walked in formation. Units entered the city, secured the opening, established a perimeter, and advanced block by block. Baghdad's remaining garrison attempted to hold the breach. By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the eastern quarter of the city. On February 10th, the caliph sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hulagu's reply arrived within hours. Present yourself at my camp tomorrow. Alone. On February 13th, 1258, the caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not go alone. 3,000 members of the court followed him. His sons, ministers, scholars, generals. They passed through the gates unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not threatening, simply present. The procession moved through the Mongol camp. Soldiers watched in silence. No insults, no violence, no visible anger, only observation. Hulagu received the caliph in his command tent. His first question was practical. Where is your treasury? The caliph hesitated. We are prepared to offer tribute. Where is it? Directions were given. Hulagu sent soldiers to confirm. They returned 3 hours later. The vault had been opened. What they found could not be denied. Gold ingots stacked by the thousands. Silver coins packed into chests. Jewels accumulated across generations. Silk enough to clothe an army. Hulagu ordered the entire treasury documented. Then he ordered the caliph brought there. The caliph was led back into Baghdad through streets now under Mongol control, past buildings beginning to smolder, to his own treasury. The door stood open. Hulagu walked him through room after room, vault after vault. They did not speak. They did not need to. The questions hung in the air, unspoken. Here is the rewritten continuation, keeping the same tone, structure, and gravity, making it clearly original while preserving historical meaning. No ruler names are changed, and the narrative flow remains intact. Why had this wealth been stored here while the walls crumbled? Why were soldiers left unpaid while gold lay untouched? Why was the treasury sealed while the city prepared for nothing at all? What happened next is recorded differently depending on the source. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din later wrote that Hulagu ordered the caliph to be fed his own riches, forcing him to consume the wealth he had valued more than the survival of his people. Whether this occurred literally is debated. What followed is not. The Mongols followed Tengrist beliefs, and one principle was absolute. Royal blood must never touch the earth. To spill it directly was believed to disrupt cosmic order. When executing rulers, alternative methods were required. For the caliph, they chose one with intention. He was wrapped tightly in a carpet, bound so he could not move. The bundle was laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward, not driven into frenzy, not released in chaos, but led slowly, deliberately, across the wrapped body again and again. The weight crushed what lay inside. No blade was drawn. No sentence was proclaimed. No public declaration was made. When it ended, the caliph was dead. No blood had touched the ground. The taboo was satisfied. But something else had been created, a method that would echo through courts from Anatolia to Delhi, a death designed not only to kill, but to instruct. The caliph's sons were separated immediately. All of them. Contemporary sources agree they were executed the same day. Some claim they were wrapped and crushed as well. Others suggest they were killed out of sight. What does not vary is the outcome. None survived. No heir remained. The caliph's daughters were taken away. Their fate fades into ambiguity. Some accounts claim they were distributed among Mongol officers. Others say they were sent east into Mongol lands. After February 13th, they vanished from detailed record. The 3,000 members of the court who had walked out with the caliph were divided. Those with skills, administrators, artisans, scholars, were identified and removed. The rest were executed outside the city. That day, the Abbasid dynasty ended. 5 centuries of continuous rule. No succession. No recovery. A lineage stretching back 37 generations to the prophet's uncle was severed completely. The news spread before the bodies were cold. Baghdad was then emptied with precision. Valuables were cataloged and removed. Gold, silver, jewels, silk, spices, manuscripts. Everything of use was taken. Everyone else was driven beyond the walls. What followed is described across multiple sources. The elimination was methodical. Contemporary chroniclers claim anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead. Modern historians suggest a lower number, likely between 90,000 and 200,000. The exact figure remains debated. The scale does not. Once the population was dealt with, the city itself became the target. The House of Wisdom was set ablaze. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris. So many books were cast into the river that it was said the water ran black with ink. Knowledge accumulated over centuries vanished in days. Baghdad did not fall because it lacked culture or learning. It fell because power mistook stored wealth for strength, ritual authority for security. This is a lesson of Sinister Empires, that civilization does not protect itself by believing it is permanent. The Grand Mosque was partially dismantled. The caliph's palace was torn down stone by stone. The canal system that had sustained Baghdad for centuries was deliberately broken. This was not chaos. It was engineering. The destruction was calculated to ensure the city could not recover quickly, could not organize resistance, could not reclaim its former position within a single generation. Baghdad was not meant to vanish. It was meant to remain alive just enough to remember what had been done to it. On February 20th, Hulagu ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind the city with entire neighborhoods erased. its population reduced by at least half. But they also left something else behind. Survivors. People who had seen the caliph walk out of the city and never return. People who had watched institutions collapse, libraries burn, and authority dissolve without a final battle. People who would carry the story outward. Because the Mongols did not want Baghdad forgotten. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story reached Damascus. Within months, it reached Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not only that Baghdad had fallen, but how, and what had been done to man who believed himself untouchable. After February 1258, something shifted across the Islamic world. Cities that had been preparing for resistance reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before Mongol banners appeared. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages in advance. Smaller emirates across Syria and Iraq submitted, without ever seeing a Mongol soldier, because Baghdad had not merely been destroyed, it had been demonstrated. Rulers everywhere performed the same calculation. Resist and face a siege you cannot win. Watch your city burn. Die wrapped in a carpet while your family disappears. Or submit. Retain your throne. Pay tribute. Survive. The equation was unmistakable. The Mongol expansion was finally halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut. The Mamluks, a military state base in Egypt, defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even they had learned from Baghdad, they did not rely on prophecy. They did not trust sacred authority alone. They built their society around a single purpose, creating a force capable of meeting the Mongols in the field. They studied Mongol tactics. They adopted elements of the system they faced. They prepared specifically for that confrontation. They understood what Baghdad had not. The Mongols were not raiders you could wait out. They were not chaos you could pray away. They were a system, and systems must be matched, not ignored. Baghdad survived as a city. People returned. Markets reopened. Trade resumed. But it never regained its position. The center of Islamic civilization shifted elsewhere. The House of Wisdom was never rebuilt. The knowledge lost was never recovered. The scholars who died were never replaced. Yet something endured. The memory of what defiance cost. Long after Hulagu's death. Long after the Mongol Empire fractured. Long after the steppe fell silent. The shape of Baghdad's fall remained. Preserved in chronicles, ce qui s'est passé en février 1258 recall whenever advisors debated resistance. C'était de la communication every throne dans la fumée, considering defiance against the superior force. Titles do not negotiate with tactics. Un avertissement qui a voyagé plus vite et plus loin que n'importe quelle armée. Sacred authority does not deflect arrows. Une fois appris, when systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that does not becomes a case study. Si vous pensez que some case studies echo for centuries. The Mongols did not need to destroy Baghdad to leave a mark. They needed everyone else to know they could and would. They made clear what happens to rulers who believe position alone grants immunity. That message outlasted the empire that delivered it. What happened in February 1258 was not merely war. It was communication, written in smoke, in stone, in bodies wrapped tight enough to leave no blood behind. A warning that traveled faster and farther than any army ever could. And some warnings, once learned, never need repeating. What you just heard was not meant to be comfortable. If you believe stories like this should remain visible, press like so they do not disappear. Subscribe for more chapters from the dark corners of history. And leave a comment. What part stayed with you the longest? Because history is patient, but it prefers to be ignored.